adorning the test track are some goodies. Talk us through these, please.
Well, now for me, I'm getting very excited because I've been a model railway enthusiast since the 1960s. And for most of that era, we were looking at models that primarily covered the 20th century. There were a couple of honourable exceptions. There was Lord of the Isles, there was City of Truro,
right,
and those wonderful triangulatory coaches that we know and have seen kit bashed into all sorts of things.
Yeah.
But now suddenly people are looking back at the 19th century. More liveries, more individual railways, and some very, very stylish locomotives. And the first one here is from 1874. This is a precedent class that was built for the London North Western Railway. And this is actually here in the maroon livery of the LMS, because of course the London North Western Railway joined the LMS undergrouping. It's pulling a rake of the vintage coaches that have just been produced by Hornby. Now these are generic, but again they cover a lot of different railways from an era when stuff was pretty much individually coach built. But in addition, these have a rather wonderful trick. These back in the day would have been gaslit, but now through the wonders of LED, Hornby means that with a simple touch of a magnet to the roof, you can actually turn your lights on. And it means that when you're running after dark, you have a fully illuminated train, but a train that is also not dependent on track power. It means even when your train comes to a stop in your station, if you're running on DC, your coaches still are fully illuminated. It's a brilliant trick. I don't know how long the batteries are going to last for, but I suspect because of the technology being involved and the pen cells that are inside, it will be quite a good time. So suddenly, very simply, you can have a fantastic 19th century train.
Pre-grouping era is really picking up, isn't it? Now these samples have kindly been lent by Rails of Sheffield.
Rails of Sheffield are producing the precedent class in conjunction, I believe, with the NRM, and it is produced by Bachmann. And it's the first of a couple, because then we jump forward 25 years and we get to 1899 and a rather fabulous locomotive. Caledonian 812 class. Now, there's been a lot of discussion about whether the blue is right, but we understand that in fact Caledonian mixed the blue individually as each loco was delivered.
Right.
And therefore there is actually no official Caledonian blue. There is what can probably best described as a range of shades. But the detail now on the internal motion on this is absolutely fantastic. And the tamper printing, just when you think it can't get any better, is getting better and better. I really do think now that over the next 5 years, we're going to see a lot more 19th century rolling stock and locomotives, which will give people wonderful options for layouts, which will tend to be, again, the smaller layouts, but gives you a very, very nice train in a very, very small space.
Absolutely, and the variety of liveries that you can have as well, just beautiful decoration. Now, something that isn't 19th century, we're sort of going along in chronological order here, aren't we?
We are
From
indeed.
left to right. So, 1949, I believe?
So the war finishes in 1945, and of course we get the start of British Railways. Now, British Railways knew that steam possibly had a finite life, and they started looking at alternatives. And what we have here is 18,000. She was a prototype gas turbine locomotive built by Brown Bovary, ran mainly, I believe, on the Western region, but occasionally on the LMS, and in fact is still with us today, because she sits at Didcot at the moment with the Great Western Society, but is owned by one of our honorary members, Mr. Pete Waterman. She is in the green livery at Didcot, but this is actually the livery that was used on a number of prototypes. The black livery you will also see on 10,000 and 10,001, the far more traditional style of diesel electric. This is being produced by Rails in conjunction with Helgen and again the National Railway Museum. This is one of the first arrivals and it will be on the shop shelves very soon. I'm afraid it's a fairly non-prototypical rake of LNERTs that she's pulling, But she's been happily pulling 9 coaches today
Yeah.
without a challenge.
So don't go commenting in the comments section moaning that it's not prototypical.
They still will. Now, at this point, we come to a locomotive that produced the sound of my youth.
Yeah.
My very first job was working for British Railways at King's Cross in the summer of 1970, 71 and 72. And I spent happy weeks up above platform 9 sorting train reservation labels. Every now and again, all my daylight would disappear as a cloud of black smoke followed an eruption of sound. And without fail, it was one of these magnificent locomotives starting up. In those days, of course, you would have one taking the train north through the tunnels and away towards Potter's Bar, while a second one would be at the other end of the station, starting up to run up into the tunnel and then drop back into the refuelling yard that sat just up and to the left of the tunnel entrance. I was very lucky because I was BR staff and used to lunch in the luncheon club. On one day, it was organised that I got a cab ride all the way from the end of platform 9 into the tunnel and up into the refuelling bay.
Fantastic.
I think I probably did about 200 yards in a Deltic, but it was a very, very special occasion.
I can imagine the smile as well.
Oh, the smile was enormous. Now, we've seen the Deltic before. There was an original Hornby, there is a current Magnum. But this, from our good friends Accurascale, who've worked closely with Rails, have produced what I think is going to be the absolutely perfect Deltic. It looks right. It is weighty. And once we have all the fitments, we have a sound compartment that will actually take not one but 2 speakers in order to get that wonderful throbbing sound of a Deltic. In an era where some diesels whined and made very high pitched sounds, the Deltic made a very, very deep bass note. And I know Accurascale have been working very hard to ensure that they replicate that in the model. It is amazing that some versions of this have sold out in pre-order. There is a purple Porterbrook livery, which to my mind seems very slightly odd, but that is the one that's currently sold out. The good news is that Accurascale have been able to work very closely with people who own these wonderful locomotives. Quite a number are preserved, and in fact not only do they work on the preserved lines, but a couple have returned to mainline freight service in recent years. It's seen wonderful service since 1961, but even after 60 years of active service, they are still out there running. It probably is one of the most classic British diesel locomotives.
Absolutely. Now, all of these are running samples, bar the Deltic, so we'll see some footage of these running shortly, but I mean, let's just go in on the detail of the Deltic there, and
it's got everything that I can remember. The yellow axle boxes slashed with red, the chains, all the detail in the fuel tanks. I used to travel into King's Cross from Wood Green, which meant I would go past Finsbury Park Motive Power Depot, where they actually tended to live. They tended to live at Finsbury Park and up in Haymarket near Edinburgh. And all of them, the ones named after the Scottish regiments, the ones named after famous racehorses such as Toya, were very much part of that East Coast main line. It wasn't as high speed in those days as it is now, but a ride behind a Deltic to Scotland was still a very fast, comfortable ride.
Absolutely. Right, well, let's see some of these in action.
Right, first of all, we'll take it away with 1874 precedent.
And just because you're on the controls there, how does performance feel in terms of slow speed?
We've now had precedent running on 3 separate occasions. Remarkably, she has hauled the same 9 coaches as 18,000 is hauling now.
Good grief.
Now that is quite a challenge for a 240. But it managed it. We haven't got a 10th coach available to test whether she would actually go further.
Okay.
But I'm sure somebody out there in REM Webland will actually have a go at that and let us know. But as she comes past, let's now ask 18,000 to take up the challenge.
Now, one of the things that we actually noticed on 18,000 was the curious bogie design, presumably for clearance and potentially the fitment of different gauge wheel sets. So we'll just show that on screen now, just show you how that works.
Now, the thing for many modelers is that whilst you can make wonderful locomotives that run in 00, it can be a challenge occasionally to get them to work effectively on EM and P4. Now, the club doesn't currently have a P4 layout, but we're currently in build with Orchard Wharf, which will be the replacement EM layout for Empire Mills. However, talking to the manufacturers, the message has now been received that the ability to drop in different wheel sets to these wonderful locomotives will make them readily available to a much larger group of modelers. And Accurascale and Helgen are probably at the front of this vanguard. In addition, our friends at Dapol are talking to us because they are now aware that S7 is an interesting variant of O gauge, and they're also trying to make sure that their 7mm locomotives can be readily upgraded to S7 standards for those modelers that want to do it.